Her aunt sold her with a broken fiddle and half a loaf to a wandering musician on the trail. The fiddle case had a crack down the spine of it. I'd wrapped it in boot leather and tied it with a strip of rawhide to keep the lid from flapping when I rode, and I'd been doing that so long I'd stopped noticing the crack. Stopped noticing a lot of things. That's what the trail will do to a man if he lets it. I'd been letting it for 3 years by then, maybe 4. The months had a way of bleeding into each other out there, October looking like March, spring feeling no different from autumn because you weren't stopping anywhere long enough to watch a thing change. You just moved, town to town. Mining camp to fort to crossroads to the next place that had a saloon and a crowd willing to throw coins. I played for coins, that's what I'd come to. Not for pride, not for anything larger than getting through to the next week. I'd had a real life before that, a house with a proper door, a woman I was going to marry, a position playing for a dancey hall owner in Abilene who told me I was the best he'd ever put on a stage. That was before the fire, before things I don't need to go into here. The point is that by the time I rode into the little settlement they called Cutter's Ford, not a town, not really, just a cluster of buildings around a trading post, and a well and one deeply unhappy-looking cottonwood, I wasn't much. I knew I wasn't much. I'd gotten comfortable with the knowledge. I had 23 cents, a horse with a stone bruise on his near forefoot, and that fiddle in its cracked case. I was going to play for my supper at the trading post, sleep in their barn if they'd let me, and move on in the morning. That was the plan. I was very good at plans like that. Small plans. Plans that didn't require anything from a man except that he keep moving and not look too hard at what he'd become. I tied my horse at the post rail and went inside. The woman behind the counter was built like something you'd find near a buffalo run, wide and low to the ground, and mean in the way of a thing that's been surviving a long time. She looked at me the way they all looked at me by then. The traveling musician look, which is a particular variety of the nobody look. She didn't say anything. I asked if they'd take a couple of tunes in exchange for a meal and a corner of the barn, and she started to say no. I could see it forming on her face. And then the door opened behind me and a girl came in. Not a woman, not yet. Maybe 17, maybe a year or two past that. Hard to say. She was wearing a dress that had been cut down from something made for a larger woman, so it fit her wrong in the shoulders and dragged on the left side where the hem had been restitched in a hurry. She was carrying a bucket. She set it down, wiped her hands on her hip, and looked at me the way you look at something you've never seen before but aren't afraid of. I remember that look. Most people, when they saw a man like me, worn down, road-dusted, not particularly clean, they either dismissed me or got wary. This girl just looked, like she was deciding something and taking her time about it. "He's a musician," the woman behind the counter said to the girl, and the word came out the way you'd say stray dog. The girl looked at my case. "What do you play?" "Fiddle." "Are you good?" I hadn't been asked that in a while. Most places didn't care whether you were good. They cared whether you were loud enough. "I used to be," I said. She thought about that. "You could play for the men at the cook fire tonight. My aunt has been promising them music for a month." The aunt, I assumed that was who stood behind the counter, made a sound that was not agreement. But she didn't say no. The girl, her name was Calla, I'd learned that later, a name her mother had given her before her mother died, picked up her bucket again and went back out the door. I played that night. A dozen men around a fire outside the post, freighters mostly, a couple of soldiers out of uniform, one old trapper who fell asleep before I'd finished the first tune. I played for 2 hours. The coins came. Not many, but enough for a meal that had actual meat in it, and the barn was dry and my horse got hay. I thought I'd be gone by first light. I was wrong about that. In the morning, Calla was sitting on the fence outside the barn, just sitting, watching the sun come up over the plain like she had an appointment with it. I came out leading my horse. His foot was still sore. I could feel the hesitation in his step before I'd even mounted, and she looked at me and said, "You're not going to make it far on that horse." "He'll be all right." She got down off the fence and came over and lifted the foot herself. Just took the hoof up like she'd done it 10,000 times and looked at it. "He needs rest, 2-3 days at least." "I know that. But you're leaving anyway." I didn't say anything to that. She let the foot down gently and stepped back. "You can stay, I'll talk to my aunt." She paused. "She'll want something in exchange." "I can play again tonight." "She'll want more than that. She'll want you to work." I looked at her, she was calm about it, not pleading, not pushing. Just laying out the situation the way you'd lay out a map. What kind of work? There's a roof that needs patching, some fence posts. She had a man for that, but he left with the last freighting party. I looked down at my hands, calloused on the fingertips from the strings, not particularly useful for anything else. I'm not much of a carpenter. She's not particular, Calla said. She just needs a man who'll stay in one place for more than a night. I should have said no. I was good at saying no to things by then, good at keeping myself moving so nothing could accumulate. No obligations, no history, no weight. But my horse was lame and the road ahead was 3 days of open plain before the next settlement, and so I said yes. That was the first mistake. By which I mean, it was the first good thing I'd let happen in years, and I knew it would cost me. The aunt's name was Vera. She was not a kind woman, but she was a fair one, which in my experience is rarer and more useful. She told me what she wanted, she paid what she owed, and she didn't pretend to like me. I respected that. She'd been running the trading post alone since her husband died 6 years back, and Calla had come to her 3 years ago when Calla's mother, Vera's sister, went the same way, and between the two of them they kept the post alive. Vera never said any of this to me directly. I learned it in pieces, the way you learn most things in a place like that, overheard, inferred, filled in. I patched the roof, I reset 5 fence posts. I chopped enough wood to get them through the week. My hands blistered and the blisters broke, and I kept working. The horse rested in the corral and ate good hay and started looking like himself again. At night I played. For the men who stopped, sometimes just for the fire, once for no one at all, just sitting outside after supper with the fiddle because I needed to, because it was the only time the noise in my head went quiet. On the 3rd night, Calla came out and sat on the step and listened. She didn't say anything for a long time. I played a piece I'd written myself years before, something slow, built around a melody I'd heard my mother hum when I was a boy. I hadn't played it in a long time. I don't know why I played it then. When I finished, she said, "You're better than you said you were." I said I used to be good. You still are. I put the fiddle down on my knee. The night was cold, coming onto autumn, and the stars were the kind you only get far from any town, dense and indifferent and very beautiful. There was a time, I said, and then I stopped because I didn't know how to finish that. There was a time. There was a time I played for proper halls and people dressed for it and felt something doing it that I can't describe to you except to say it was the only thing that made me feel fully real. And then there wasn't, and I'd spent 3 years pretending that was fine. She didn't push me to finish. She just sat there on the step in the cold dark, listening to the aftersound of the piece, and I was grateful for that. My horse was sound by the 5th day. I had no reason to stay. I found reasons to stay. I told myself it was the roof. There was another section on the storage side that looked like trouble. I told myself it was the fence. There were posts further along the west side that would need attention before winter. I told myself things. I was good at that too. What I was actually doing was watching Calla work. Not the way you might think, or not only that way. I watched the way she moved through the place, the economy of it, the absolute absence of waste in everything she did. She knew where every tool was. She could look at the sky and tell you what the weather was going to do. She mended tack by lamplight with fingers that barely seemed to have to think about what they were doing. When a freighter came in wounded, a mule kick, bad bruise across the ribs, possibly cracked, she got him on his back, assessed it, wrapped him, and gave him something from a small tin that she kept behind the counter, all without raising her voice or making a production of any of it. She'd learned things, hard things from having to, and she did them without expectation of comment. I had been around women who were strong in a performing way, who made sure you saw the strength. Calla wasn't like that. The competence just was, like the ground under your feet. You trusted it without thinking about it. Twice I caught her looking at me while I was working. Not the assessment look she'd given me that first morning, something else, something quieter. I told myself I was imagining it. I need to tell you about the night at the end of the 2nd week, because that's where the story turns. I'd been drinking, not badly, not fall down drunk, nothing like that, but enough. One of the freighters had brought a bottle of reasonably good whiskey and been generous with it, and I'd had 3 glasses over the course of the evening, which for a man who hadn't been eating enough for months was enough to loosen certain things. I played later than usual. The men drifted off and I kept playing because when I stopped playing, I'd have to stop not thinking. Vera came out at some point and told me to go to sleep. She said it the way she said most things, like a fact, not a request. I put the fiddle away and went to the barn. I don't know how long I'd been lying there when Calla came in with a lantern. She set it on the post of the nearest stall. She had a blanket over her arm, which she held out to me. The one I'd been using wasn't enough for how cold the nights had gotten. I'd been sleeping in my coat. She'd noticed. "You don't have to," I said. "I know I don't." I took the blanket. She didn't leave. She stood there with the lantern and its small orange light between us, and she looked at me in that straight, undeflectable way she had, and she said, "You're going to leave." It wasn't a question. "I usually do." "I know," a pause. "I don't want you to." I looked at her. I was trying to find the calculation in it, the need, the strategy, the loneliness that makes people say things they don't mean. I'd been around enough people by then to know that most declarations come from a want that's really about something else. But there was nothing like that in her face, just the straight fact of it. "I don't want you to leave." "Calla," I said. "You don't have to say anything," she said. "I'm not asking you for anything, I just wanted you to know." She picked up the lantern and she went back inside. I lay in the barn in the cold with that extra blanket across me, and I stared at the rafters for a very long time. I didn't leave the next morning. I also didn't talk to her about what she'd said. We moved around each other differently for a day or two, not awkwardly, nothing like that, but with a kind of care. Like you move around a piece of good furniture you've just noticed for the first time. I started playing better. I don't mean technically. Technically I was the same, but I'd started to care again, somewhere in those 2 weeks, without noticing, and caring changes the sound. The men who came through the post would stop mid-sentence sometimes when I was playing and stand there with whatever they'd been holding still in their hands, just listening. One man told me I was wasted on a trading post. I told him he was probably right. 3 weeks in, Vera came to me. She was direct about it, which I'd come to expect. She said she needed someone to stay through the winter. The post couldn't run on just the two of them with the supply runs and the weather and all of it. She said she would pay me, not much, but fair wages, room and meals and a straight wage. She looked at me like she was prepared to be refused and had her response to that already queued up. I told her yes. She looked at me for a second too long, and then she gave me a small nod and went back inside. Winter on the plain is a different country. I don't know if you spent a true winter out there, not a trip through it, but in it, planted, watching it happen from one spot. The first snow came in November and the world turned white and silent and closed down to the circumference of what you could see from the post. That's it. That's your world. The fire inside and the white outside, and the sounds of the building settling in the cold. I liked it, that surprised me. I'd been running for so long that stillness had come to feel like threat. Stillness meant you were stuck, which meant you were failing, which meant you had to look at what you'd become. But something had changed. I wasn't looking at myself the same way. I was looking outward again, at the things around me, at the work, at the sound the wind made coming under the east wall of the barn, at the particular way Calla's breath showed when she came out to feed the horses in the cold morning. I fixed the east wall. I fixed a lot of things that winter. The bad night came in January. A man arrived at the post, came in out of a storm half frozen with a story. Trapper. Said he'd been caught out 2 days by the weather, lost his pack animals, nearly died. Vera let him in because you let people in from a January blizzard. There's no other choice, and she fed him and let him sleep by the fire. In the morning he was still there, and the morning after that. He was watching Calla. I noticed it before she did, because she was used to not being watched, or used to being watched and not caring, which comes to the same thing if you've learned not to expect anything good from it. This man's watching was different. I've been around bad men enough in my time to know that particular quality of attention. I didn't say anything to Vera yet. I kept working, kept watching him, kept my distance. On the third night I was in the barn late and I heard her voice, low, controlled, not panicked, which was very Calla, and I was through the barn door and across the yard before I'd thought about it. He had hold of her arm, not violently yet, but with the weight of intent. She was looking at him with that calm, unafraid look that could be mistaken, if you didn't know her, for indifference. I said his name. Or rather, I said what he'd told us his name was, which I doubted was true, but it was all I had. He looked at me. He was a big man, bigger than me. He was calculating whether I was worth the trouble. I didn't say anything else. I just stood there. I want you to understand that I am not a fighter. I am a musician. I had no weapon on me, and he could see that. What I had was that I was not going to move, not going to walk away, not going to find a reason why this was not my business. I don't know exactly what he saw in my face. Whatever it was, he let go of her arm. He made some noise about a misunderstanding. He went inside. In the morning, he was gone. Vera didn't thank me, but that evening she poured me a measure of the good whiskey she kept for herself, which was more than a thank you. Calla came to me later in the barn, again, lantern, cold, the specific smell of hay and horse and winter. But this time she came to me and put her arms around me, and I don't know what I was expecting from that, but it wasn't what it was, which was simply solid, like the hug of someone who means it with their whole weight. She was not small, and she pressed against me like she was trying to make sure I was real, and I stood there with my arms around her and felt something in me that had been braced for years just let go. A little, not all of it, but enough. I've been trying to tell this in some kind of order, and I don't think I've been fully honest, which is that a lot of it happened slowly, and slowly is hard to tell without either speeding through it or making it sound bigger than it was. What I mean is that winter is not dramatic. The drama is in September and October, in January when something happens. The middle of winter is days and work and cold and lamplight and meals and silence and small things. Those small things are what I mean to tell you. Calla had a habit when she was reading by the fire of putting her feet up on the second chair without thinking about it, and then remembering and taking them down again if she heard Vera coming. Vera had a rule about it that dated from before Calla arrived, some house rule from the husband's time, and Calla followed it because Vera was Vera, but she followed it with the slightest possible eye roll, visible only if you were sitting across from her and watching for it. I watched for it. I looked forward to it. That tiny flash of personality in a girl who was otherwise so composed. It made me laugh once quietly, and she looked over the top of her book at me and she smiled, not the polite kind, the real kind. And for a second the lamplight was very warm and the fire was very good and the storm outside was just weather. That's the kind of thing I mean. She knew music. Not playing, she said she'd been given exactly 3 fiddle lessons once long ago, and had proved sufficiently terrible that her teacher had suggested she pursue other gifts. But she could hear it. She'd say things like, "You rushed the middle section," or "That note you always slide into on the second phrase, don't slide, just land on it." She was right every time. I have been given professional instruction by men who knew far more than she did, and none of them had an ear like that. I started to play for her. I mean by that, not for the room, not for the coins, not out of habit, for her listening. It's a different thing. When you play for someone who truly hears you, it's a different thing. There were letters in February. My old life had a couple of people left in it who knew, more or less, where I tended to circulate, and who would send letters ahead to trading posts and forts along the routes I traveled. I hadn't answered any letters in a while. I had 2 waiting at Cutter's Ford, which Vera gave me with no comment. One was from a man I'd played with for years. He was putting together a group, planning to tour east, asked would I come. Good money, he said, proper venues. I sat with that letter a long time. 3 years ago, I would have answered the same day. Go east, play music in proper halls, make real money, be something. But the idea of leaving, I tried to make it sit in my chest, and I couldn't make it settle. It kept floating up. I wrote back, said I was settled for the winter and would think on it for spring. That was the first time I'd told anyone, including myself, that I was settled. Spring came fast that year. The way it does out on the plain, the snow doesn't gradually ease. It just stops one day, and the mud comes. And then the light changes, and suddenly the grass is coming up in the low places, and the sky is a particular shade of blue that has no name. The freighters came back through. The post got busy again. I played most evenings and word had gotten around. More people stopped who were looking for a night's rest and knew there was music here. Vera raised my wage without being asked and without making anything of it. Just told me the new number. I said thank you and she waved her hand as if I'd said something unnecessary. The letter writer wrote again. The tour was forming up. He needed an answer. I found myself at the fence one morning, the one I'd mended back in October, watching the plain to the east and thinking about nothing useful. Calla came up beside me. She'd been checking the stock. She had a piece of harness in her hand that needed repair, and she stood there turning it over the way she did when she was thinking, that unconscious working of her hands. After a while she said, "There's a letter come. To now. Are you going to go?" I looked at the plane. A hawk was working the thermals high up, barely moving, just writing. "I've been thinking about it." She didn't say anything. "What would you say," I said, "if I didn't?" She looked at the harness in her hands. Her jaw had a particular set to it that I'd learned, by then, meant she was choosing her words carefully, not because she didn't have them, but because she wanted them to be right. "I'd say I was glad," she said, "and I'd say that ought to be your reason only if it's enough, and I'd say," she stopped. "Say it." "I'd say that you came here worn down to the bone, and you're not that anymore, and I want that to keep being true. Whether you go or stay." She looked up at me. She was very calm and very direct and very serious, the way she was about most things. "You came back when that man had hold of me and you didn't have to. You've been here all winter and you've been good at it. There are people, good men, who are not good at staying. You are, and I want that to mean something to you." I turned and looked at her. She looked back at me without flinching or qualifying it. The harness was still in her hands, and the hawk was still up there working the sky above the plane, and the spring morning was cool and clean, and she was standing close enough that I could see the slight color that had come into her face from saying those things. I reached out and took the harness out of her hands, not for any reason, just to give my hands something to do while I said the thing I was going to say. "I'm not going," I said. She nodded, not a big reaction, not the kind of reaction you'd put in a story. Just a single nod, and then she looked at the plane again, and then she put her hand over mine on the harness. Just laid it there, steady and warm, her fingers over my knuckles, and we stood at that fence in the spring morning and didn't say anything else for a while. That was enough. That was more than enough. Vera didn't say anything about it, but she started making 2 cups of coffee in the morning without being asked. The 3 of us moved through that spring and into summer in a way that had its own shape to it, the shape of a household, of people who know where the other ones are without having to check. Vera gave me the room off the back of the post, which was where her husband had done his accounts, and I put my fiddle case on the shelf there, still in its cracked spine with the boot leather wrap, because I hadn't needed to travel with it in so long that I'd stopped bothering to fix it. I fixed it eventually. One evening when there wasn't much else to do, I took the case apart, worked the crack with wood glue and a clamp, let it set overnight, and in the morning it was solid, not perfect. You could still see where the break had been, but solid. Calla looked at it when I showed her, that direct look of hers. "You didn't have to fix it," she said. "It worked fine." "It was broken." "So you fixed it," she looked at me. "You're good at that." I think she meant more than the case. There's a story a man tells himself when he's down, the story about how he got here, how it all went wrong, how he's not what he was and isn't going to be anything again. I've been telling myself that story for 4 years. You get so used to it that you start to think it's not a story at all. You start to think it's just the facts. She took the story away from me, not by arguing with it, just by making it untrue. A woman came along on that trail, sold for next to nothing, worth more than anyone in that transaction knew. She had her own wounds. She'd been handed off by the one person who was supposed to keep her, and she'd gotten up from that and built a life out of whatever was at hand, good at things because she'd had to be, steady because the alternative was not surviving. And when she looked at me, she didn't see the wreckage. She saw whatever was still worth seeing, and she told me so plainly without making a performance of it. That is a gift freely given. I know what that cost her. To say those things to a man who was still half-packed, who might have ridden out any morning. To stand at a fence and put her hand over his knuckles and say, "You're good at staying." I know how much room that took. She had the room. That's what I mean when I say she saved me. The fiddle case is still here, fixed on the shelf. I play most evenings now, and when I play, she's usually somewhere nearby, at the table with something to mend, or just sitting, listening with that ear of hers that doesn't miss anything. Sometimes she says, "That note you slide into," and she's right. I'm still sliding into it. I don't think I'll ever stop. The plane is very wide and very quiet out there at night. The lamp in the window throws a long orange stripe across the ground, and the sky is enormous, and there are coyotes sometimes off to the north that call back and forth to each other like they've got unfinished business. I was unfinished business too once. She finished me. Not fixed entirely, not like new, but whole the way something is whole when it's been broken and is now solid again. You can see where it was, and it doesn't matter because it holds. She's coming in now. She's carrying something. I can hear the step, the particular weight of it, the way the door latch sounds when she lifts it. In a minute she'll come through to where I'm sitting, and she'll set down whatever she's carrying, and she'll look at me the way she looks at me, which is the way you look at something that belongs. The lamp is burning. The fiddle is on the shelf. The plane is quiet out to the edge of what you can see, and further than that. I'm not going anywhere.